I'm going to open up with a little bit of a background snapshot, if you will, about the foundation, and I'll refer to the organization as CFAS throughout the presentation, just to let you know, because we have a bit of a big handle. Of course, it's called the Canadian Foundation for Animal Assisted Services, Support Services, and we'll understand why that is in a few moments. I'm going to also, as we go through the slides, provide a big picture for you in terms of the industry itself and how we're connected to service dogs, followed by a brief industry snapshot for service dogs, and we will look at a couple of the, or at least not a couple, but a few terminologies that are frequently used in the sector and publicly. And I will also make reference to the ABCs of service dogs nearing the end of the presentation today, just to I guess, reinforce the fact that we do have some pretty good resources online, and we're hoping to continue to expand them. And certainly during the presentation or thereafter, if there's anything that comes to mind in the transit world that might be useful being in the ABC's resource, on the resource pages and tabs, we'd be happy to look at adding them, because it will be a work in progress. So with that, I will start with our vision. The organization has actually been around for a little over 20 years, actually. And what our vision essentially is that we want to inspire and sustain the innovation, coordination, and integration of exceptional animal-assisted services within Canada's healthcare, social services, justice, corrections, and voluntary sectors in order to build a healthier, safer, and barrier-free Canada with people, pets, and partners, animals in service. And our overarching mission is to unite and engage consumers, producers, and representatives from relevant organizations such as yours, disciplines, and sectors in order to co-create our collective desired future for one of Canadians' most treasured connections, the human-animal bond. And essentially, the easiest way to describe our organization, because we're not a frontline organization, CFAS is best explained or described as gap fillers and dot connectors. So what that means is that because we're the only interconnected industry association that does not provide frontline services, we do a number of things such as hold national events, summits, we give grants to other charities. We also are getting much more involved and very thrilled to be involved in research and development of the industry as well, the industry that's evolving, and a number of other things as well, but that would just give you a little bit of an idea. So wherever there's a gap to fill, that's what we're looking at doing in the industry, so we don't duplicate efforts and such, and that we're actually complementary to the frontline organizations, helping to try and make their world and their jobs easier on the front line. So animal-assisted services, what exactly are they? So you can see by the photo that there are a number of things, and actually the applications for animal-assisted services is growing exponentially. Now there are dogs that go into courtrooms, there are dogs going into schools and universities to help de-stress people. They're going into justice buildings and victim service organizations. It's no longer just service dogs or equine therapy programs or therapeutic riding. The field is growing by leaps and bounds, and hence one of the reasons we exist is to also look at quality assurance and also making sure that vulnerable populations are not exploited in any way and that the animals in service are well cared for. So the big picture when it comes to the charities that are involved, did you know that service dogs are only one segment within the emerging animal-assisted services industry? And what that means to us as an organization and to the service providers is that they kind of blend in. There are probably around 89 to 90,000 registered charities in Canada right now, and they're grouped in under these different headings. And so animal-assisted service organizations, while they're not just registered charities, they do fall under other charities. So it's really hard to find organizations, and that's another area that we work on. So right now we're working on revamping our industry directory of services and programs So what we're also hoping for in the longer term, or hopefully the shorter term, if we're doing really well, is that we can change that and have animal assisted services recognized as its own sector, if you will. So this is Charlie and Charlie's handler, and I just wanted to talk to you briefly about what a service dog is, and it would be interesting when I look at your questions whether or not there are some differing definitions, because we're finding that everybody has their own way of describing them or perceiving what a service dog is. But what we have ascertained is that a service dog is a canine that has been trained to perform specific tasks to benefit a person with a disability or other daily living challenges. So, for example, other daily living challenges could be caused by chronic illness, something similar to what veterans are experiencing and first responders, which are operational injuries, and a host of other areas where people really struggle on a daily basis, but are maybe not falling directly within the category of disabilities, whether they be visible or invisible disabilities. What is a service dog team? A service dog team is comprised of the handler. In some instances, it's an alternate handler and a task-trained canine that improves quality of life. So where an alternative handler would come in would be if it's a child, for example, and they're too young to work with the dog entirely on their own, or because their disability is not, or is such that it makes it very difficult for them to manage solely with the on their own. And the other thing to consider with alternate handlers is that sometimes, of course, they need to step in to help take the dog to veterinary appointments and various other things that need to be done with a service dog to maintain the animal's health if the handler is not able to do such things. The emerging service dog industry. So what does that look like? It's a self-regulated industry, which is what most people are not aware of. A lot of people we talk to or that contact us think that there's all kinds of balance and checks and there's an infrastructure in place already in the service dog world. But in reality, it is a self-regulated industry. It's extremely competitive like any other marketplace, and it's extremely fragmented. So currently, anybody can hang a shingle on their door saying that they're starting a service dog training organization and that they are a service dog trainer, with or without any kind of accountability and or qualifications. So that's pretty scary for a lot of folks. There's a self-trained teams. We're running into that a lot, and we're hearing a lot more from transit service providers because people are, getting on board various modes of transportation, and it's getting harder to identify if it's a service dog team or if somebody's getting on board with a pet, for example. And of course, in different transit situations, pets are allowed, but of course, there's some rules and regulations around that as well. But essentially, there's a lot of self-trained dog teams out there right now, and again, there's no way of monitoring that. There are some people are fortunate enough they can hire a trainer to work with them. But again, in the pet dog industry, as well as the service dog industry, another thing to bear in mind is that there are no provincial, national, or internationally recognized standards. I say that we just found out, though, in Ireland, there is a national standard in Ireland that has just been created. I believe it's for pet dog trainers, if I'm not mistaken. But again, this is not a new industry. Dog trainers have been around a long time, but there are a lot of different ways people get involved in dog training, and the credentials are by no means consistent. And of course, lastly, there's a whole other layer being added now in the marketplace, and it is also unregulated, and it's the retail sector. So now what we have is a group of businesses that are popping up all over the place, and they actually sell vests that say service dogs on the vests, and they're also, in some cases, not so much Amazon, but other organizations are now registering self-trained service dog teams, and they're issuing ID cards when they purchase a vest. So there are no balancing checks in any of those instances. So that is, of course, another concern. So some terminologies that I would like to highlight are either service dog trainers, that's a term that's often used, and also producers, but they're basically one and the same. Presently, there are no academic or government regulations, as I mentioned, overseeing the certification or qualifications of producers. Trainers come from a variety of backgrounds with expertise that may or may not encompass training a service dog team, or working with persons with disabilities. The term accreditation of service dog organizations, again, there's a lot of misconceptions about what that means. The current service dog landscape encompasses a combination of business models like sole proprietorship, for-profit organizations, nonprofits, membership-based organizations, and registered charities. Some organizations may be members of umbrella organizations, while others prefer to work independently. Accreditation in this context does not refer to a third-party contractual or governmental accreditation through regulatory requirements, but rather an internal process that suggests a degree of self-governance that determines an organization's benchmarks for brand performance, also known as private company standards, that are applicable to their respective membership only. So again, there's a lot of people struggling with terminologies like these, especially the accreditation side of things when organizations say they are accredited. But by and large, what that really means is that they belong to a membership-based organization that has devised some what they consider to be best practices. They often refer to them as standards as well. But again, the standards that these membership-based organizations have are not industry-wide. They are actually just applicable to their membership. Service dog teams certification. Here's another term that's used very frequently. The term is used by producers to attest that the dog has been tested in accordance to their private company standards for its ability and suitability to carry out specifically trained tasks that support its handler at home, when entering public spaces, and when accessing services available to the public. And again, it is not synonymous with everybody's perceptions. It is definitely a term that needs to be defined as well. And so we had been talking about the ABCs of service dogs. Our organization literally hears from thousands of people from different sectors, the public, and just a whole gamut of stakeholders about service dogs. In fact, those are probably the most inquiries that we get, in addition to some equine programs and other types of animal-assisted services. But what we tried to do was sum up the information that we had, because our website was inundated with information about service dogs. So try and make it a little bit more palatable and easier to navigate. We came up with the ABCs of service dogs. So there are 3 tabs actually, a number of links within those tabs that describe accessibility of service dog teams, benefits, and challenges. So we hope that that is going to be more and more informative as we continue to contribute content to that. And of course, at the beginning of my presentation, I just briefly mentioned that there will be an opportunity for transit organizations to stay in touch with us and provide additional and updates concerning your sector, so that we can make sure that we don't miss any important transportation information that involves service dogs. So connecting the dots and filling the gaps in the context of service dogs is no easy feat. So what we are doing now is we are at a point where we're conducting an industry survey or feasibility study to look at formalizing this segment of animal-assisted services. It has actually taken the good part of 20 years to get here, because when we started working in this area over 20 years ago, nobody wanted to talk about standards. So now it is the talk of the town. Everybody is interested in standards and adamant that they need to exist. Of course, the environment being non-regulated, it does take time to assess readiness for change and to help people to understand what standards mean and how they will benefit not just the industry itself, but organizations like yours and various other stakeholders like schools, hospitals, and everywhere basically where a dog would enter a facility with their handler. So there are a whole lot of people that we still need to hear from in terms of what this industry is going to look like. So having said that, I would like to make brief mention of accessibility and accommodation of service dog teams. And so I thought this presentation might provide a little bit of insight by citing what the Supreme Court of Canada has to say about this. So the Supreme Court of Canada said that when there is an inconsistency or conflict between Canadian human rights codes and administrative practices such as policies, regulations, legislation, etc., the practices do not supersede the code. So in other words, the code always has primacy and will prevail unless there are extenuating circumstances or specific exceptions, such as being able to demonstrate undue hardship. And so some organizations, or in the case of transit as well, you know, we may get complaints about people boarding with service dogs. And so demonstrating the undue hardship is extremely difficult. And so that is a long, daunting process as well. And so we're very proactive in terms of advocacy. And for many, many years now, we've provided advocacy in a way that looks at all sides, everybody's perspectives, everybody has a voice that's involved, so that we can resolve the conflicts as opposed to having to go the long route. Certainly some situations people do file human rights complaints, but that could take years and years to resolve. So again, looking at the gaps within the industry and some of the problematic areas, we need to collaborate in order to resolve those, so that we're not looking at trying to resolve all these problems, but actually moving forward together as part of a caring community and a caring sector as well, so that people with service dogs can basically be included in their communities in a much more seamless manner, so they can contribute just as the rest of us do. So they just basically want to live like everybody else lives and have options that are going to not just benefit themselves, but the people around them. So the areas that I've highlighted here when it comes to the human rights component is that from a consumer satisfaction and safety perspective, people with service dogs boarding transportation just simply want to be safe. They don't want to be singled out if not necessary. Typically, if somebody boards and there's no problem, the dog's not acting up, the dog's focusing on its handler, it's quiet, it's clean as it can be in the winter, of course, because there are some exceptions with weather. But I mean, you know, the animal looks like it's well groomed and cared for. There's often no reason to really approach the person. Then there's the welfare of the service dogs. Sometimes we do get complaints where people have witnessed something when someone's boarding various mode of transportation, and they'll say the dog wasn't being handled properly. It was being forcibly pushed into things, and just some inhumane behavior was detected or observed, and we do get the occasional, very rare complaint concerning that. But again, we don't have a whole lot of ability to track those kinds of things because, as I mentioned, the balance and checks need to be in place. We need to establish that kind of framework that will be able to intervene more more willingly if we are able, but that infrastructure still doesn't exist. So we really cannot do much about it other than maybe encouraging somebody to go to a local humane society or other organization, or even the police, depending on the situation. The other part of it, of course, is the transit community, and specifically in this case, urban transit and public confidence. So we recognize that your jobs are not always easy. As I said, it's very, very difficult sometimes to know if it's a service dog team, especially if there is a confrontation on your transportation, mode of transportation, and also when the dog is acting out, if that is the case. And so, you know, we understand that you have your challenges too, and we want to know what those are and to find out, you know, what would make it easier. But we'll get to that in a minute. Oliver's going to cover that, so I won't go there right now. But service providers, as I mentioned, are a big part of this. So the people that are on the front line in urban transit, they're the folks that really need to manage this on a daily basis. So, we'd love to hear more about that. And of course, your management staff as well, when you're considering policies within your organizations and your own best practices. Again, those are areas that we can potentially collaborate on. And I guess the biggest one of all, of course, is the human rights piece, because, and I'll talk about that in a moment once I talk about the other common considerations. So for the industry itself, service dog industry, what is needed there, and we've narrowed it down considerably, is that we need to find a way to work with service providers so that we can come up with again, a seamless and very clear way of educating the public. And of course, hence why we need standards, why we need the definitions clarified, so there's more consistency there. A common language. Would a national ID card be helpful as well? A single entry point for disseminating and sharing information. We're also looking into that with our new revitalized directory, and either national standards of Canada and or Canadian industry standards. And those are all areas that we are getting more involved in to monitor quality, satisfaction, and to inspire innovation. And I thought it wouldn't be a great presentation unless I ended on a great note with this cool dog. I asked Oliver about it before the presentation because I just couldn't resist. He is a pretty cool dog, and most people that we talk to from the transit system think dogs are pretty cool for the most part, and that is awesome. So, but we also realize that we have a lot of work to do, and as you can appreciate, we can't do it alone. And it's very important for us to be able to stay in touch with you folks and to really have a sense of how we can make good things even better, and where there are some issues or concerns, how can we work through them together so that we have a really good sense of both sides of the story, if you will. We can take into account, the things that are happening in your lives on a daily basis, and or when situations arise, for example. But we want to be here for you, and we hope that we can be of service to you, and we would love to be able to stay in touch with you. So with that, I'll end there.